I'm Hunter Lose, and I'm a rail fan. But this show isn't about me. We are here at Corvallis High School for Winterail 2018. This year's the 40th year of this event, so come on, let's go in and meet all the other rail fans and see what's going on. And we're over here with Angelou Fogg. I've known Angelo for about 4 years too. He's also been involved with the Bay Area Electric Railroad Association with me. He's also involved with the NWP Historical Society, and he has just published a brand new book. So Angelo, so tell us about how you first got into it and you first got into it and became a rail fan.
Well, now that's a long story, but I will make it short for first time in my life.
Okay.
So this gentleman next to you, Michael Peckner and I have been friends for over 60 years. He was a pen pal in Railroad magazine. Now that tells you a lot about rail fans, okay? There was no internet, no social devices. So I met Mike Peckner through the Railroad magazine, and as a result of that, lo and behold, I became a rail fan with NWP as my primary passion. Well, I was, and as you'll see in the back of this book on page 395, for example, you will see something about the author, about 396, excuse me. So the author was asked to put something about himself in the book. So the author put 3 pictures: age 8, age 38, and age 68. And what you see there is the Northwestern Pacific at Hoppin, California, 1957, waiting for the passenger train Redwood, and he and his brother on this gondola, right, expecting the train to come. So yes, Michael, it was ahead of meeting you. That's my passion. So the passion has continued for, what can I say, 60-something years.
Where were your favorite areas to chase trains? Obviously the NWP, but were there any other areas that you really liked to kick around in and go around and go photograph trains at?
Yes. So for example, I'm a Southern Pacific fan as well, and have been. And so anywhere SP was, from Louisiana to Ogden to Portland, and my primary love on the SP was really Oregon. Up on anywhere on the 6Q line, Wolf Creek was one of my favorite places. Glendale, Wolf Creek, all of that. Modoc line I got to get over at least twice, and even during helper days.
Wow.
So I always regret that I wasn't around in the steam days to do a lot of that, right? I'm just at the very end of steam, but I got to do stuff that maybe Hunter can't see today.
Yes. That is very true about how all relative it is. It definitely is. I mean, he's kicking himself. He missed steam. I missed SP as a whole railroad. Think about that.
That's true. Well, you see a lot of it today up here.
Yep. So anyway, we'll go around and we'll go see more people. Thank you very much, Angela, for your time, and hope you enjoy your time at Winterail.
All right. Thank you.
And then Paul Greenfield came up to talk to us, so we decided we'll have him say a few words too. So, Paul, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you became a rail fan and what first got you into trains?
Well, the year was 1974, and I was into photography, and I was kind of looking for a subject to shoot. And so I went down to the harbor in Los Angeles and took some pictures of ships and boats. And that was sort of interesting and so forth. And then I had a good friend of mine who got into railroads, and he was also a photographer. And we connected with an individual by the name of Don Flynn. And Don took us up to Cajon Pass. And at that time, the Trains magazine article had come out on Cajon Pass. So I was studying it in the back seat of Don's car, thinking, okay, well, I'll get some photos, but, we'll go through the day. This probably won't be very interesting, but, what the heck, So anyway, we came up to Cajon Pass on the Highway 138 crossing, and we saw a UP 6900 Centennial working its way up to the summit. And Don said, I think we can beat him to the summit. And I said, okay, let's go. And so Mike Martin, myself, and Don Flynn raced our way up to the summit at Cajon Pass. It was a November day. The sun was over my shoulder. Looked down into that cut, saw that 6900 Centennial blasting up the grade, and it was like, it clicked. I said, this is it. This is what I want to photograph from now on.
Yeah. So as far as places to photograph and places to go, where are your favorite places, favorite routes, favorite railroads? Where are your favorite places to go see trains?
Well, now I'm back in California, but I spent 10 years in the East Coast, and I spent 7 years in the Salt Lake City area. So, I mean, basically all over the U.S. and particularly Canada. I have a real soft spot for the Canadian National, Canadian Pacific, and during the 1980s used to make a trip up there almost every year, and got some great stuff there. I even made a trip to South Africa in 1984 to get the last of steam. Regret not going to China to get the end of their steam, but what can you do? But I also have a real soft spot for the Milwaukee Road, and I made 3 trips up there during the late 1970s to photograph the end of the Milwaukee Road, and unfortunately that's all gone now, but I have a soft spot for the Pacific Northwest too. So.
All right, well, thank you very much, Paul. We'll
Right.
continue on, see more people here at Winterail. All right, so I'm here now with Craig Ferguson. Craig, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you first got into trains and what got you into it?
My father got me started. He used to chase cab forwards over Santa Susana Pass and in San Fernando Valley. And as I got older, he would take me on back in the glory days when you could go down to Redondo Junction in Los Angeles and get permission to wander around the Roundhouse and East LA, places like this. And that cultivated my love for the railroad, its history, its equipment, its culture, and all this. And it's invariably caused me to not only pursue railroad history and preservation, but also ended up going to work for the railroad, which I've managed to maintain my love for the culture and for the preservation and for the hobby, as well as being a professional railroader, which sometimes is difficult. But it's through people like Hunter and a lot of these other people you'll see at Winterail that has broadened my horizons and encouraged me and brought me to really enjoy this hobby and made it an integral part of my life. And the neat thing about this hobby is that I've had great times in my life. I've had a few good times that weren't so great, but this hobby has always kept me going because I always had friends that encouraged me and relatives.
Like, what's your favorite thing to do within the hobby? I know you're a railroader, but on your off time, what's your favorite thing to do involving trains?
Railway preservation and history, both. And a little bit of modeling, but one of these days I'll have a layout, but I got a lot of equipment, but no layout.
Oh, there's a lot of
But
people
she's
who are in the
been
same
very
boat.
encouraging about it for the most part. She keeps saying, when are you going to build a layout so you can run all your trains? And she's even told me that she'll park the car outside so I could have the garage for the model railroad. Which
So-
is supreme sacrifice. Her car is much nicer than mine.
So to any of you rail fans who plan on getting married, remember that an understanding spouse is very important.
Yes, and as Jason Schron would say, you have to have a very patient and understanding wife to be a model railroader, especially if you're crazy like he is, and so am I.
We're here with Mr. Stache, or he goes by Stache.
That's it.
And we're over here, and he's over here. We're walking around at Winterail some more. It's always nice to run into more familiar faces. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about how you became a rail fan and what first got you into trains?
Way back in the dark ages, my mother used to take us to San Francisco on the Key System F train, and I was probably about 8, 9, or whatever, and I was fascinated by that. And I thought, this is the ultimate train ride. And I still have memories of the signals, the switches, the yard, the whole bit. And of course, as time went on, those trains have been gone for you know how long, but I still have fascination with the old Key route, and that's what started it. But I've like mainline railroading too, and up to this day, I'm up here by Amtrak, and I've traveled cross country on Amtrak, and I just love riding the railroads. I like the operational side of the railroad too, dispatching and how you know that sort of stuff, not just counting the rivets. So.
Is there any favorite sort of railroad, any sort of favorite area that you like to go to, like to do anything involving trains at?
Oh, well, always out here in California. I like railroading across the country. I like looking at New York. I like the New York subway system even. But out here in California where I'm familiar with the locale, yeah, Donner, Shasta route, Coast route. Coast route's probably my favorite ride, you know. Who doesn't like that?
Yeah. This is Bob Zink. And Bob Zink has been one of the key players with the SP 9010 and the SP History Center project. And he lives in Washington, and he works in freelance media. And Bob, we'd like to hear a few things about how you became a rail fan and how you first got into it.
Well, sure. I was a kid who had a buddy who used to take the train. His family kept taking the train when everybody'd sort of stopped taking the train. I grew up in Central California. We'd moved to the Bay Area, so I wound up taking the San Joaquin Daylight from Fresno to the Bay Area and back and forth to go spend weekends. And I was a plastic modeler from the time I was very young. And I just looked at this and said, this is awesome. I don't know where you can get models of this stuff. And I just began to sort of investigate those possibilities. One day I'm standing on the platform in Fresno. This is the short form.
No, that's fine. Just tell
of
the
this story.
Just tell the
So I'm standing on the platform, and there's this young guy, he's probably in his mid-20s. I'm 15, 16, and I said, I'm taking a picture of a Sunset Limited logo on the side of a passenger car, and I don't know why, because I think that train's the San Joaquin Daylight. So he said, well, I see that you're curious about that. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, it used to be on the Sunset Limited, and he explained. So we have been lifetime friends for 50 years. He would send me information before we had books that went into so much detail. And I just became just mad for all of the historical detail, all the ins and outs, mostly because I felt we were losing passenger trains. And this was the last chance to see them. This was shortly before Amtrak, when everything changed. We lost half the trains in the country. So I feel very fortunate to have ridden a lot of the great Western passenger trains because of meeting people, because of my friend George, and that's how I became a rail fan.
So, are there any particular favorite things you like to go and take a look at? Favorite trains, favorite locomotives, favorite locales to go photograph? Anything you like to see that's a particular favorite?
Well, I'm not an active rail fan these days. I will stop and enjoy, but I don't physically go out and chase trains anymore. But I have been working on this project, as you know. I've been working on these two projects. I'll do this again. This is the German Kraus Maffei, the last of an experimental locomotive from the 60s. And this was a rusting hulk, and it now runs and is coming up to a full restoration. It's the only one of its kind in the world, custom one-off. And we are working, and we're working with you on the restoration of this car, which was the Bud car, which ran in the Eel River Canyon in Northern California. So we're going to get this guy looking beautiful, and it'll be the centerpiece in a new rail history museum.
So, we're over here now with Ben Kletzer. Anyway, Ben, why don't you tell us a little bit about what got you into trains and what got you started?
So I would say what got me into trains originally is I grew up on the East Coast, and so I would watch trains go through the Hoosick Tunnel every afternoon, and that kind of got me hooked, right? And so I moved to the West Coast, where I lived next to Roaring Camp and Big Trees. So that really got me hooked on steam. So from there, I got really interested in steam locomotives, steam locomotive technology, and then started working for Roaring Camp, actually, on the railroad. Everything kind of changed when I was 18, because I had always wanted to see real revenue steam trains. And I kind of felt like I had this weird thing that, like you and I have, right? That we're born too late.
Right.
And so I'd always felt like I was born too late. And so I saved up and I went to China for 3 weeks. And I was just hooked instantly. And so since then, I've traveled to China 52 times. And basically spent the last 4.5 years of my life in China chasing steam trains. I've traveled to every province in China chasing steam trains, and then outside of China, I've also gone to 2 locations in Africa that still have revenue steam, both Zimbabwe and Eritrea. And now I'm back in America. But what got me hooked past that was just the kind of the drama of railroading. It's a really dramatic scene and a changing scene dynamic, and it was really cool. And so last year I did a Winterail show on China Steam, and then I'm dabbling with some other stuff now in Africa, hopefully going back to Africa this year.
This is Ted Benson. Ted Benson is very well known for his wonderful black and white photography all around Northern California. And he lives in Modesto. He used to be a journalist for the Modesto Bee. And anyway, we're going to talk to him now and find out, Ted, so what first got you into trains?
I had a 6th-period French class that was boring me to tears, and I decided that, they had me sitting by the door, and all these kids are running around in the hall. It's like, how did they get out? Well, they're in the journalism class. They're in yearbook. I was like, I think I'd much rather be out there than in here, so I signed up for yearbook next year, and away we went.
Away we went?
Yeah, away we went.
Going out shooting trains just all the time?
Well, see, the thing is, I got into journalism to learn how to take better pictures of trains.
Oh, okay.
And it was, one thing led to another, and I'm still learning how to take better pictures of trains, and after 40 years of newspaper work, so I think something's rubbed off.
So what are your favorite railroads, your favorite era, your favorite time period? Basically, the period of trains that really gets you going over anything else.
I suppose guys my age would say, oh, it was the 50s and the 60s, and
right.
They were formative, but I think it just depends on the era. I mean, I've enjoyed it all the way through. There's a lot to recommend, today's railroading. It's just you have to work harder, but that was kind of the impression back we had in the 70s when we were really getting serious. It wasn't as easy as the guys that had steam locomotives, and you just have to, if you're dedicated and are willing to work at it, you're going to come away with something. Mm-hmm. So
that is very sound advice for anybody who's getting into it, by the way, is if you work at it, if you're successful at it, you'll be able to take decent train pictures. It's all dedication. It doesn't happen overnight.
And don't be afraid to talk to people. I mean, that's the most important thing is, people skills are huge.
Yeah, people skills, advice, everything. It's a huge thing. So thank you very much, Ted, Railfan community. This is Elrond Laurence. Elrond, why don't you tell us a little bit about what got you into trains and how you first got interested in railroading?
Oh my goodness. Well, I first got into trains thanks to my mom and dad, and my dad was a huge Santa Fe Railway fan. And he took us on these crazy weekend trips to Barstow. I grew up in Southern California, a little steel town called Fontana. Mm-hmm. And we would, everyone else went to Lake Arrowhead, or they went to Vegas, or they went to the beach. We went to Barstow. Mm-hmm. And we'd go stay at the Route 66 motor courts out there. And when it would cool down in the evening, we'd start driving around and looking at all the Santa Fe locomotive shops. And my dad would take pictures of everything. And then he started snapping pictures of me in front of all these old Santa Fe engines. And we would drive the old highway, and I would just count the Santa Fe and UP trains, and that hooked me. That's what got me into the hobby. And then sometime around, I guess I was in junior high, and I just thought, I'm going to start taking pictures of trains, and I think I could get into this. And I got into it. Mm-hmm. And I've never looked back, and it's been the greatest hobby. And yeah, I mean, the Santa Fe is definitely my first love. That's of as far as railroads go. That's my first love, and the old Union Pacific of that era. But God, the whole area of Southern California, I've just become a fan of. I don't know if I really have a favorite place anymore, but I would photograph, as a kid or as a teenager in college, I would photograph Cajon Pass, Beaumont Hill, Tehachapi, kind of the usual places. Mm-hmm. But I started to get into branch lines too. Mm-hmm. And the branch lines were really special to me, and that's when I realized, what you could do, that, you could work in highways and people and, businesses and all these little slices of life, and you could mix that in with the trains, and then I found my niche.
Hello, my name is Brad Lamaze, and I've been a rail fan since I was old enough to look at trains and go, wow, I like that. That's really what it's all about, I think, for a lot of guys, when they're the big machines, the noise, the movement and stuff like that. It was always very impressive. So it's something that you could easily get interested in, and the world was full of amazing things when you're a kid. But that one caught a lot of people's eyes, and I certainly enjoyed that from the very beginning. Let's see. Probably the best experience in the early days was when I was a little kid. We rode on the Kansas City Chief from Texas to California. My grandparents lived here, and that was a memorable experience because I was a little tiny kid, and I still remember the locomotive pulling into the station out in the middle of Texas in the middle of the night. And right before our train came, though, actually the milk train came, and they still had steam locomotives then on that train. So that was pretty impressive, and I could still see that. And that was kind of where it got started. As years went on, I got more and more involved. It was something to do, taking pictures, going around. That was a lot of fun because you could see a lot of trains, meet a lot of other guys that were interested, a few gals that were interested in the big machines, the trains going by and everything else. Then I got into locomotive technology more seriously. I'm one of a genre, if you will, of locomotive enthusiasts, if you will. And that was kind of an area of interest. A lot of guys share, but not everybody. The machines themselves and how they work. Fascinating. And steam and diesel locomotives. And just kept taking pictures, going on fan trips, getting cab rides.
I've known of David Lang for the past 4 years, watching his slides and stuff and his photos all posted all over Facebook. And you can tell us a little bit about how you first got into trains and how you became a rail fan.
Well, I didn't really have a choice. I'm actually a third generation railroad photographer. My father's father started taking pictures in Waterbury, Connecticut in mid-40s, and he took his son, my father, Charles, down to the roundhouse all the time during the 40s, and you got to walk around all these big steam engines. And I've been around trains literally since a couple days after I was born. You know, always been alongside the tracks, and I think it just in the blood, I guess.
I know that feeling for sure.
Yeah,
Definitely.
used to take a lot of family picnics where we lived in Santa Barbara. Family picnics were out by Dos Pueblos Ranch, right along the coastline, late 60s, 67, 68, 69. I got to see a lot of the final days of F units, both on the coastline in Cajon Pass and also the Tehachapi's. Family vacations were spent in the Tehachapi's or Cajon Pass. So, you know, I literally grew up around trains, you know. So I think, haven't really nailed it down yet, but I think my dad put a camera in my hand when I was maybe 5 years old. And, you know, started taking pictures then and started getting photos back and realized my photos were looking a lot like his, and it's because I was standing right next to him. So started wanting to do more artistic stuff, so I just tried going out to different, you know, wherever he would stand, I would stand in a totally different place.
What are your favorite places to go? What's your favorite railroad and favorite places to go shoot?
Well, my favorite railroad was Santa Fe. Grew up seeing a lot of that in the early to mid 70s on Tehachapi and Cajon Pass. SB is a close second. I live in Eugene now, but usually my favorite places to go are up the valley between Eugene and Albany. It's just not a whole lot of people photograph that area, and I've been up there numerous times. I know all the tricks to chase trains up there, and there's just a lot of nice open countryside to get shots there. And so sometimes they'll go up on the hill on the Cascade line, but mostly the valley line is what I like photographing.
We just talked to David Lang, and then come round wandering over here was his father, Charles Lang. Now, you heard a little bit about Charles from David's story about David first starting to take pictures from his dad. So now we get to hear the dad's side. So Charles, why don't you tell us how you first got into trains and what got you interested?
Well, basically it was my father. He went on a fan trip, a New Haven Railroad fan trip with a friend who invited him on, and he got really enthused with the steam locomotives. So he went out and bought a 4x5 speed graphic camera, which I still have, and he went out and took photographs of the New Haven steam engines, as well as New York Central, Maine Central, Boston and Albany, and various railroads in New England. And of course, he took me with him. I was about 3, 4, 5, 6 years old at the time. So, and that obviously got me interested in it. So, and my mother also went along, and she actually took color slides. My father took the black and white 4x5s, and my mother took the color slides. So, and you know, I was going to high school. I didn't get into it too much at that time, but then after high school and moving to Santa Barbara, California, I went to Brooks Institute of Photography in Santa Barbara and ended up getting married there and getting back into trains again. So I took a lot of, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, I took a lot of photographs of the Southern Pacific trains, as well as we enjoyed trips to Tehachapi and Cajon Pass. So we got shots of Santa Fe in both places, and Union Pacific over in Cajon Pass. So, and thankfully I was able to shoot a lot more than I thought I was going to be able to. So, so I've got, you know, probably about 70 or 80,000 slides, color slides of basically SP, UP, Santa Fe, and a few other little railroads here and there. And of course I love steam engines because of, you know, going with my father and seeing the New Haven steam engines. So I was more interested in steam engines. So I chased 44, 49, quite a few trips, 3751 Santa Fe, and thankfully the 3985 came up to Eugene in 1985, so I was able to get a bunch. My son and I chased it from just above Dunsmuir all the way up to Eugene, so I got a lot of good video and stills of it. So
Wow,
you
that
know.
is awesome. So is there any particular favorite railroad, favorite place for you to shoot, favorite subject matter? I know you mentioned steam being one of your favorite topics, but is there any favorite place you like to go to, any favorite railroad in particular?
Well, I like both Santa Fe and SP, and so a couple of the favorite spots were obviously the Tehachapis, where you could see both, as well as Cajon Pass, but more the Tehachapis is where I camped and pretty much hiked that whole area from down by Inman all the way up to Tehachapi itself. Pretty much hiked almost all of it. So I've got pictures almost everywhere.
Wow.
So I'd say, yeah, the Tehachapis are probably my favorite spot.
It's a great spot. A lot of people love that spot.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Charles. More people, and we're here with Joel Ashcroft now, and we're going to hear some more about Joel's story and how Joel became a rail fan. So, Joel, how did you first get interested in trains?
Well, I was born and raised in Oak Ridge, Oregon, and logging town, and you know, not a whole lot to do around Oak Ridge. A lot of outdoorsy stuff to do, but the railroad went through there, and my parents used to take me up and see the trains, and I immediately was hooked. And I used to hang around and watch the railroad traffic all the time. In Oak Ridge, they used to cut the helpers in and out, and so ever since then, I took a liking to trains, and now I work for the railroad, and so it's kind of a, you know, labor of love, being able to work for the railroad doing something that I love. It's kind of nice. I was able to keep going with that.
Yeah. So, what's your favorite railroad, your favorite place to go photograph trains, if you do go out photograph, favorite place to see trains and places like that?
I'm more into the history. Of course, I took a lot of photos of the Southern Pacific when I was in Oak Ridge. Anymore, while I work for the railroad, I really don't have a whole lot of time to get out and take photographs of the trains, just because I work so much. It's hard to get time off. But I would love to go back east, see the eastern seaboard. You know, the old Chesapeake and Ohio, New River Gorge. I would really love to check that out someday, and see the traffic. Even though it's CSX now, it would be nice to see it. There's a lot of history there, coal routes. So, but like I said, eastern seaboard, I would love to go there someday and spend about 2 weeks there.
And we ran into Ed Lynch here. Ed Lynch works for California Northern, and he's also, as you can see, a rather big fan of the Milwaukee Road and Milwaukee Road Electrics. And anyway, so we're going to talk to him and talk of him about, so what first got you interested in trains, and what first got you started?
Well, I don't know. I was about 5 years old the first time my dad said, that's a train, and I want to drive one of those someday. And it just kind of stuck with me. You know, I was in the Air Force for 20 years, and turned into a kind of a rail fan. You know, I was stationed in Great Falls, Montana, and I met up with a guy named Art Jacobson who got me interested in the Milwaukee electrification. Right at the very end, the electrics had already stopped running, And he took me down to several places on the Milwaukee and showed me the Little Joe that had been restored. And the overhead wire, of course, was still in place, and it just kind of got me hooked. And I've been kind of a Milwaukee historian ever since, trying to preserve the history of the Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little about your work with the Little Joe in Deer Lodge. I hear you did a little bit of paint work up there with that.
Well, yeah, it was donated to the city of Deer Lodge in 1994 when the electric stopped running, and it was put in a park near the county courthouse, which is kind of off the beaten path, off the main road in town. So in 1992, our historic group called Mill West decided to restore it back to its 1950s appearance. And we got with the city of Deer Lodge and the county and historical group there in Deer Lodge and decided to move it and restore it. And we spent about 2.5 years getting it moved and restored. And when we got it finished, it was just looked like it had been come right off the the builder's direction floor. So it looked pretty good.
Oh, it's definitely gorgeous looking. It looks beautiful. Thank you very much, Ed. We're going to continue and go see who else we can find. Friends, this is Mike Tisdale. Tell us a little bit about what first got you started in trains.
My mom thought that maybe tying a Fisher-Price pull train behind my tricycle at age 2 might have had something to do with it. Although we lived in Pacifica at the time, and I know we would have gone down. We went down to the Cow Palace and down to the San Francisco airport occasionally. So we probably passed Bayshore Yard when all of the SP power was stored there. The old commute power was stored, which finished just before I was born in 1957. So maybe seeing those old steam trains, maybe seeing maybe those toy trains. But somehow I really got into trains, and by age 4, my folks decided I could go to that they'd take a trip to San Francisco on the train, and I liked that so well. Next year we took a trip to Chicago on the train. So and it's kind of been doing it ever since. Probably shot my first pictures around age 6 when we visited my grandfather in Arizona. He was a SP station agent at Miami, Arizona on the branch there. And a couple Black Widow Jeep 9s came into town, and I had my little Brownie camera, and click, 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 got a couple shots of that. And, definitely not exactly David Plowden quality photos, but I kind of like them from back then. And so I've been kind of a train fan all my life.
Come from a standpoint of taking pictures. I mean, you mentioned when you first started taking pictures. So where are your favorite places to go shoot? Where have been your favorite places in the past, maybe your favorite places now, to go out and shoot trains and see trains?
Anywhere where there's a train, although I've gone to Johnston, been up Donner Pass any number of times. I like going down to San Francisco, seeing the PCCs and the light rail, and back in the day Train Masters, and now Caltrain on the commuter trains there. Been overseas. Had a steam trip to India that I really enjoyed in 1980, and then went by Europe. Learned I really like the Rhine Gorge. The 3 times I've been to Europe, I've either ridden a train or done some rail fanning in the Rhine Gorge area between Mainz and Koblenz in Germany. Beautiful, beautiful stretch of scenery with railroads on both double-track electrified railroads on both sides of the Rhine. I pretty much, if there's a train, I'm interested in it. Chicago's great as well. Yeah, it's another nice, another good place to go. More trains than you can imagine.
Familiar face. This is Phil Ghazni. He just recently retired as an engineer from Amtrak. He hired out with the Milwaukee Road and started with Santa Fe when he came out west. And so, anyway, we'd like to hear more from Phil about his railroad career and how he first got interested in trains and was interested in becoming an engineer. So, Phil, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
All right. We'll start at the beginning.
Okay.
Okay, my hometown was Memphis, Tennessee, and it's all where you live and grow up. And so I was impressed by the passenger trains of the Illinois Central and the Frisco, and as luck would have it, my neighbor next street over was a locomotive engineer on the Frisco, and his train was a Kansas City, Florida Special, and it was powered by bright red E-units that had named for racehorses. So I got invited me down at a young age when I was about 13 years old, and said, come down and see me off. Bring your folks down, see me off on every third day I go out on this train. So I when it was particular Sunday, when it lined up on his departure on a Sunday morning, would go down and see Mr. Ellison. Got in the cab of the Frisco E units on the Kansas City, Florida special, and he arranged for a legal cab ride, and it was not just in the terminal only. It was 129 miles between Amory, Mississippi, and Memphis on the 3.5-hour trip on Frisco E unit at age 13. So after that trip, I was hooked. That's the job I want. I'm going to be a locomotive engineer. So that's what started my interest. Couldn't think, being in Memphis, and my lucky stars that I had my first cab ride at age 13 on the Frisco. I applied to the Santa Fe, the Burlington, the Milwaukee Road out of Chicago, the Illinois Central. Lo and behold, the Milwaukee Road replied back with an application, come up for an interview. I got hired in July of 1969. I was a brakeman and worked the West Line on the Milwaukee Road towards Savannah, Illinois, from Bensonville to Savannah. And then I actually worked 3 times on the city streamliners as a flagman between Chicago and Marion, Iowa, on the city of Los Angeles, city of San Francisco, and city of Denver, Portland, running as second sections in late 69, early 1970. Several brakeman conductors on the Burlington were based out of Aurora, and they said, come over here, work on the Burlington, work on the Q, they called it back then, CB and Q. And so I went out, applied for a job at Aurora, got the job, and I left to Milwaukee. I was there less than a year, got a job on the Burlington. So I was there for 4 years in train service as a brakeman, worked out of Aurora and Galesburg, Illinois, worked both freight and passenger. I worked the North Line from Chicago to Aurora to Savannah, freight and passenger. I worked the main line, as we called it, from Chicago to Galesburg, both freight and passenger there. And tried to get an engine service. So that as luck would have it, a friend of mine was working for the WP, Western Pacific, in San Francisco in the home office. And he says, come out here for a visit. And he said, well, check out, if you like the area, check out the Bay Area and maybe get into engine service out here in California. So I came out, stayed with him, went over and checked the WP. They were not hiring. Checked on the SP at West Oakland. They were not hiring. And my third choice was Santa Fe. And I went over to Richmond, and I said, you need any future engineers, engineer trainees? He said, you're in luck. The PR guy's going to be in town tomorrow accepting applications. So I came back the next day, and he said, yeah, we're looking for experienced men. I said, well, I'm your man because I've got seniority right now. I'm on my 5th year and as a brakeman. He said, well, you're hired. If you pass this physical, you're hired. So I went and took the physical that afternoon, passed it. So began my engine service career in April of '74. And so I've been in engine service working in the San Joaquin Valley on the Santa Fe, and that included freight and passenger. And then I worked the covered wagons and early San Joaquins. I also worked one trip on the SDP 40Fs, the 543 series down to Bakersfield. And then when Amtrak took over in '86, I left the Santa Fe and went over to the Amtrak in the fall of '86 and retired from Amtrak with 32 years of service on. But if you add it all up, it's been 43 years engine service, and add 5 more years when I started out.
Face, Mike Leland. I met Mike several Winterails ago, and we formally met and started talking last year at Lamaze at the debut of the SP Narrow Gauge 18. And Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you first got into trains?
First got into trains, I can blame my dad for that, primarily. He was into trains for a long time before I was, from when he was little in Chicago. And I get... and so, you know, it's gotten me out, gets me to a lot of places I never would have otherwise gone. Met a lot of people I wouldn't have otherwise met. So I don't participate as much as I used to. But, you know, things kind of ebb and flow. At the moment it's ebbing a little bit, but that's okay. But like you say, and Laws was still an event that kind of feels like somebody should still pinch me.
that event was amazing.
Somebody should pinch me because it's just...
No one thought that would happen. No one.
Correct. I never really thought I'd actually see anything operating there. Not like that anyway, beyond the motor car, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was another, even the motor car was like, I never thought I'd see that either.
Right.
So, very good.
So as far as your interest in trains go, what's your favorite railroad? Where are your favorite places to go and shoot when you want to go out and shoot?
Probably the Western Pacific and the Feather River Canyon, at least most often. I do like going up a High Line now, all the way up as far as Beaver. So, yeah, I would say the favorite railroad's WP for me.
Any particular reason as opposed to other railroads?
Well, probably because I was introduced to it as a kid. Admittedly, the WP mostly didn't exist by the time I was paying attention. But the history, my grandparents lived in Paradise when I was little. So we drove the Feather River Canyon, we drove up the High Line, we went to Portola before Portola was a museum. So it was, that's probably where that interest comes from, the interest in the history. So
I can totally understand that interest completely. Wandering around, we've come across Mr. John Black here, and he's going to say a few words to us about how he first got interested in trains. So John, tell us a little bit about how I first got interested in trains.
Well, my dad got me interested at a very young age. He used to take me out to the train yards, and back in the 60s and early 70s, it was more common to get on the property and go for rides, so we were often doing cab rides, and I started taking pictures with a 126 camera when I was 3 years old. And so that was in 1968. In 1970, I graduated to 35 millimeter, and I did a lot of rail photography through the years. I pretty much gave up slides in 2006, went digital, and yeah, I mean, I work in the industry, so I've done a lot of traveling, working with Siemens for 27 years, and now I'm working as a consultant. So, yeah, I mean, it's been fun, and I still get out occasionally.
Yep, so as far as your railroad interest is concerned, do you have a favorite railroad, favorite places you'd like to go shoot, anything like that?
Well, my favorite railroad was Milwaukee Road on the West Coast, but of course it's all gone now. For me, I'm not really interested in the modern stuff, so I find myself going to Colorado to shoot the narrow gauge. It's the same thing over and over, but I still like going back there, and it's one of my favorite places to visit. Internationally, I love going to Germany and Austria. I was in Cuba in 2003 and had a fantastic time. And I'm looking for other places to go and branching out into new venues.
Yeah. Mine, Mr. Scott Inman, he's probably the only person that is around my age group that loves the SP about as much as I do. And so anyway, without further ado, Scott, why don't you tell us what first got you into trains and what got you interested?
Well, thank you, Hunter. It's a pleasure to be here in Corvallis. It's wonderful to have this table here set up, and we're thrilled because we just debuted a book this morning, Photo Bob's SP. And as we stand here right now, we have 4 copies left for sale out of 120. So it's been a great show, a great morning. We love it. But what got me interested in trains? Well, my grandfather, Robert Hornbeck, was one of the founders of the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento. And I grew up with model trains at a very young age. I was immersed in the history. We would spend our summers having camping trips in Willits on the NWP. We'd go up Donner, went down to Cajon and Tehachapi many times, and I was really the last generation of people who grew up loving the grand old Southern Pacific.
Were there any favorite places that you wanted to go and wanted to see trains more than anything else at that time?
Oh, well, we had a couple of favorite spots. One of those was an area that rail fans refer to as Steinheimer's Curve, up there at Immigrant Gap. Used to love watching stuff come around there from a high vantage point. You'd see the tunnel motors come through and they'd just be screaming. We'd also go up to Tunnel 6 before that all closed down in the early 90s. We'd go up there and take pictures. And then I loved going down to places like Herndon at the crossing of the San Joaquin River there and get some nice bridge shots. And so, growing up in the Sacramento area, I got the CCT, came up to Polk, I got the SP, Union Pacific by that time, of course, had taken over the WPs, but still there was a lot of things happening in that area. You could drive down to Stockton, go to the tower, that was always a favorite. You got all those railroads in one day, so it was pretty awesome.
And what's your favorite era of railroading? Your favorite aspects of modeling? We haven't had too many model railroads speak up too much since we've been doing this, so I'd like to hear a little bit more about your modeling and what you're doing with model railroading.
Sure. Well, I started out with model railroading when I was about 2. Always have been an HO scale. I started modeling what I saw. So a lot of the late era SP, got the Jeep 60s, when they came out, detailed the Athearn Jeep 50 and all that stuff to be accurate. And I realized as I was doing this that I had a passion for prototype modeling. And I consider myself to be somewhat of a railroad modeler rather than a model railroader. And it's just always the way it's been. Bob Zink, who's with us here at the table today, has been one of my greatest mentors. I grew up reading the Mainline Modeler. And it was really at that time where I discovered a passion and a love for modeling the Southern Pacific in the transition era. I loved the steam to diesel transition, and I grew up seeing things like the cab forward at the museum. There used to be a guy named Smitty down there, and he worked at the shops. He rebuilt cab heads for SP, and so he would walk me around the engine and tell me how all of the linking rods and cylinders and the wall charts mechanical mechanisms worked, and taught me about the Worthington feed water heater and all this stuff. So I really started getting into steam, and so maybe when I was about 12, 13, I realized that passenger trains were something I was passionate about too. So I model all that stuff. I have almost one of every Southern Pacific post-war steam class in HO scale. There's a few that are still left to be had, but I've almost got them all.
And we have over here Mr. Mike Peckner. So Mike, we're here just wondering what first got you interested in trains and what first got you into becoming a rail fan?
That's pretty easy. Lived in Novato, born and raised in Santa Fe and Marin County. And my father liked trains, and he took me down to Grand Avenue Station. And when I was, I don't know, as early as I can remember, 4, 5, 6, and that's how I got hooked. That's simple. Like a lot of kids along the country and around the world, your father or parents will take you there or show you something. And what kid wasn't interested in trains when he was young? So that was basically it. Very simple. Nothing out of the ordinary.
Now, as far as the train interest is concerned, what is your favorite interest? Like your favorite railroad, your favorite operations, favorite trains to chase, favorite things to see?
Well, of course, it's NWP. I grew up on the NWP. Angelou Fogg right here, he and I have been friends since we were 8 years old, and one of the things that, of course, you can't do today because of the trespassing rules and because of the heightened concern about security and things like that, we rode the trains. We were friendly with all the crews. We could go on the NWP anytime. We rode many, many miles through the years from the late 50s, 60s, 70s, even into the early and mid 80s. And we knew all the crews, and they knew us, and they knew that we weren't going to do anything that would cause them any problem or harm them. Well, there's 2 other people here, also of the same era. Dave Hardy is here, and George Landrock, who's a former Amtrak engineer and road foreman of engines. We all grew up together in Marin County, and we all rode trains together. Novato had an open station. I knew the agent, and I was able to work the handles on the order board, for example. It was a Railway Express agency station, and so how many people remember what Railway Express was all about, and I helped them with some of the chores in the station and stuff like that.
So tell us a little bit about your time as the official weatherman for the SP as well.
Well, obviously I'm a meteorologist. That's what my business has been for many, many years. And I started forecasting for Southern Pacific in the mid-'80s, and actually earlier than that. And then I was able to hang on with the Union Pacific when they bought Southern Pacific in 1995. So I'm now the Union Pacific meteorologist, and I forecast basically the overland route, the I-5 corridor, Feather River Canyon, forecast for Highway 84, Interstate 84 corridor, which is the Blues Mountains and Meacham in Oregon and Idaho, and I also forecast for the Cascades here in Oregon. And 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, No holidays, no days off, but it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun.
Yep.
And so I also forecast for the Northwestern Pacific Railroad, the North Coast Rail Authority, and I've known Vic for many, many years. If this is the 40th year of Winterail, I think I've been to about 38 of them.
Wow.
So that's how the forecast for Winterail happened. Vic asked me if I wanted to be the chief meteorologist for Winterail, and I said, sure, of course, and I've been giving him forecast for many, many years as well.
A lot of people know this man. This is Dick Doran. And so, Dick, we just want to know what first got you started in your interest in trains?
Probably it starts back to my childhood days. My dad was a chemist for Shell Development. They had a lab in Emeryville. I lived in the Bay Area. And there's Spenger's Restaurant, which was right next door to the Berkeley Depot. And that was a favorite restaurant of my parents, and we would often go to dinner there. And after dinner, we would walk over to the Berkeley Depot and we would watch whatever came rolling through. And I can still remember cab forwards and, you know, daylight engines and brand new Alco PAs. And in my study at home, there's my dad had a nice, relatively nice slide camera and took a picture of me when I was 1 year old, standing in front of the city of San Francisco, and the Alco PA that is leading the number 101, which is the eastbound train, was built the same month that I was born. So I think that probably, maybe had some kind of whatever aura around it that got me interested. Later on, my dad, you know, we had, you know, little Lionel trains and stuff around our house, and I kind of got interested in that. And then later on, my parents moved to Pleasant Hill, and my dad used to take me up to the Martinez train station in Saturday afternoons, and we would watch, you know, all the trains come in and out. So I think that's probably where it all got started.
It's like, what's your favorite railroad, your favorite places to go in photographs, your favorite trains to go out and see?
Well, growing up in the Bay Area, obviously the SP was my number one railroad. So I spent in the late 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and into the 90s. I traveled from Oregon to El Paso and from Oakland to Ogden. Pretty much photographed as much of the SP as I possibly could. Then in 1971, I moved to Yuba City, and of course my hometown railroad there was the Sacramento Northern. The Sacramento Northern was really a really hustling place. They were very friendly, welcomed me, open arms, you know. I could ride in the cab, ride in the caboose, do anything I wanted to do. Very, very friendly people there. And then also in my backyard in Yuba City was the Western Pacific as well. So lots of trips up to the Feather River Canyon. And then I got into the snow stuff somehow or other. And I'm not sure what drove me to that, but I got totally fascinated, and I think early on it was more the challenge of, this is the most inclement weather that I can think of, so how am I going to go up and shoot railroading in that, and, you know, shooting the rotaries, and, you know, getting totally buried the first time I ever shot a rotary in action, and learning the hard way about knowing what direction they're going to throw. So that's probably, you know, the major interests, although I've traveled a lot, you know, did a, you know, week-long stint for the last of the Little Joes on the Milwaukee. That was a lot of fun, and did a lot of stuff in the Northwest with the last of the F units on the BN. So those are pretty much my major interests. You know, today I've really, with the digital era, I've really gotten into night photography a lot. And that has opened up a whole new complete realm of photography that has been really exciting for me.
So we did the father, and now we got the son. We have Kevin Doran over here with us now, and he's going to tell us a few words about how he first got interested into trains. And, well, there's obviously a lot of, I guess, coming down from the family tree, I suppose.
Interest? Well, I really didn't have a choice in the matter, I guess you could say. I was born into it. Yeah, I mean, I think the first time I took a cab ride, I was probably, I think it was a Family Day special, and Stanley was the engineer. I was probably maybe 2 at the time, so I was literally born into it. Our summer vacations would consist of like 3-week trips to, like, I think the first one was in '91. We went to Nevada for 3 weeks. The next summer, we went to like Colorado and Utah, Tennessee Pass. It was all EMDs, Rio Grande still, SP. So that was, I was indoctrinated into it from the beginning, and I just grew up with it, took it, ran with it, enjoy it, and so.
So as far as your interest in going out and photographing trains, what's your favorite railroad and favorite things to go take out and take pictures of?
Favorite railroad, I mean, well, favorite thing is obviously the snow. I mean, to go out there when, it's dumb. It's like I'm here, but back at Truckee today, it's still snowing hard, and there was a rare opportunity that I'm like, oh, crap, I'm here, but, well, it's good to be here, but man, I wish I could be 2 places at once.
I'm in the same boat with you all the time. Now we are here at the old Oregon Electric Train Depot, which is now the old spaghetti factory, and we ran into another friend of ours. This is Matt Varrick. He is the author of a brand new book that came out from Arcadia last year called California's Capital Corridor. And Matt, why don't you tell us a little about your interest in trains and how you got started?
Well, I was born in Maryland, and my mother's family is from Harford County. They were not very well educated. They were a farming family, and there were really only good jobs out there for people who only had elementary school educations was on the railroad. So several members of her family, specifically my maternal grandmother's brothers and nephews, went to work on the Pennsylvania Railroad as locomotive engineers and brakemen. One of them, Ford Wilgus, died aboard his cab of his locomotive on the Northern Central north of Baltimore in 1950. His son, Harry J. Wilgus, was a locomotive engineer on the Pennsylvania and later Penn Central and Conrail, and he was the lucky one who made the first run with GG1 4935 when it was repainted as the original Heritage locomotive in 1977 on May 15th, and he also got to meet Raymond Loewy. His late son, was also named Harry Wilgus. He became a brakeman and later a conductor for Penn Central after he was discharged from the Air Force after he served in Vietnam. I have no railroad employment history in my background, but between this family background of my mother's side and then traveling in Europe while my father was temporarily stationed there, I was exposed to a lot of railroad activity because that's how we got around Europe. We traveled by train. We did not have a car. We used public transportation in order to get in between cities. We used the then state-run railroads, or currently, I guess they're still state-run, in Italy and France and Switzerland. And then upon return to the United States, I began doing railroad photography in earnest in the 1980s and moving to California in 1987, specifically to the Bay Area and later Los Angeles, and now back in the Bay Area. I did a lot of railroad photography, joined several organizations, including the Central Coast chapter of the National Railway Historical Society, where I served as president from 1997 to 1998, as well as again from 2004 to 2008. I'm also a member of the Feather River Rail Society, the Southern Pacific Historical and Technical Society, and the Western Railway Museum, to name a few.
Railroad, and what are your favorite types of trains and types of operations to photograph?
With all the mega mergers that have been going on since the 1990s, we have lost the Santa Fe is not there to photograph anymore. The Southern Pacific is not there to photograph anymore, although their tracks are still there. The equipment is different. So I have gone overseas on railroad trips. In 2003, I went to Cuba for 2 weeks and photographed the then still active steam locomotive operations on several sugar mill railways. In 2004, I went on a trip to Patagonia to photograph the all-steam old Patagonian Express, which ran as far as they could with the track conditions at that time. It was not just the little tourist operation that's around Matanzas, or El Maten rather. And then 2010, I went to Zimbabwe and Botswana for 2 weeks to photograph the remaining steam locomotive operations there. One at the Wangi Colliery and the other at a BCL copper mine in Botswana, and both operations were still all steam, plus there was still mainline steam in Zimbabwe. So to look at, to try to recreate the North American railroad steam scene from the 1950s, I had to go overseas to try to experience that, and I think I did very well. And that's also when I began shooting railroad video overseas in 2010, or specifically HD video.
To come. It is nice to see such great people out and about doing the same thing that we all love to do, trains. So, without further ado, I think it's time to go. So, hi ball. See y'all next time. So, it works phenomenally well. Wow. And then I just got a frame-by-frame 16mm machine for Rio Vista Junction, and it's just at my disposal for everything.
That is really...
SP10 release is still